Hello, I'm Graham Salinger, President and founder of Salinger Coaching Solutions, where we empower people and empower success. Welcome to my program, Passion, Empowerment, and Perseverance, also known as PEP, where I talk to my guests about how they got a pep in their step, in other words, how they've been empowered, and how they have put a pep in other people's steps, how they have had a career that has empowered others. My guest today is Dr. Betty Sawyers. Dr. Sawyers is a retired professor, expert consultant, and award-winning educator who has dedicated her life to empowering people around the world through education. Over her career, she has developed curriculum and taught in a number of topics, including working with special needs students, task analysis, behavioral management, factors impacting family life cycle, vocational education, leadership development, job interviewing skills, resource management, and HIV education, to name just a few. Dr. Sawyers has a PhD from Iowa State University in home economics education and has been a professor at Purdue University, Illinois State University, and the Southeast Missouri State University. Her expertise has been sought out internationally, having been an expert consultant with the United Nations Education and Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, in Qatar, and having worked as a Fulbright scholar in India, where she developed workshops in 6 localities on methods for teaching interpersonal relationships and human development. She also served as a visiting professor in Brazil and as a consultant to the Ministry of Education in the Bahamas. Dr. Sawyers also received an award from the Tokyo city government for her 5 years of volunteer work for the Tokyo University for the Blind, where she was a volunteer teacher. Not part of her biography officially, Dr. Sawyers is also my maternal grandmother. So that is all in summation to say my grandma's very cool. So welcome to the program, Dr. Grandma Betty.
Well, thank you.
All right. So I always start off the show by talking to my guests about their passions, because with my coaching work, I help individuals work through developing, honing in, and really perfecting their passions and following their passions. At Salinger Coaching Solutions, we focus on empowering people's passions, purpose, and perseverance. So I wanted to start off by, I just read your bio, and I wanted to know a little bit about your passion that drove your commitment to your work. So what about your life experience has informed your passion for education?
Well, I think before answering that directly, I think I would like to talk a little bit about the environment in which I grew up,
Perfect.
as that definitely affects some of your choices, if not all of your choices in early career development. Um, I was born in 1929 in a very rural agricultural section of North Carolina, the Piedmont section, in the community of Mallard Creek. And this was adjacent to Charlotte. It was not too far by miles, but at that time it was quite a trip to Charlotte because there were no highways at that time. There were some roads, but not very many. It was a very homogeneous community in that the families had been there. They were family farms of medium size, but they had been there for 3 and 4 generations because it usually went from the father to the oldest son, or if there wasn't an oldest son, to a nephew maybe, or maybe to a son-in-law. But anyway, the farms had remained in the family over a long period of time. And the community had 2 focuses, or 2 places where everyone came together. Of course, these were scattered around over the locale. The church, Mallard Creek Presbyterian Church, was founded in 1824. And they also established a school. It had a 1-room schoolhouse for a while, but it was abandoned to develop a 4-room schoolhouse. And at the time that I came along, that too was no longer used as a schoolhouse, but it had been converted to a community center. population in Mowdy Creek was about, and I don't have any specific data on this, it's just from memory, but I would say it was between 200 and 250, and that include all the old people plus the infants. Early on, the families were fairly large, 7 to 10 children, and they all worked on the farm. There was no electricity until I was probably in the 6th or 7th grade. And there was very little indoor plumbing at that time. So in my grandfather's age group, no one had gone to college. I don't know, maybe some of them didn't have very much formal education at all. In my father's generation, there were no males that went to college, but 3 women in the community went to college, became teachers. 2 of them left the area, and 1 of them remained teaching in an adjacent area. In my era, there was not a great emphasis on careers, because most people, remember, this is during the Great Depression, so there was not much opportunity for working elsewhere because there just weren't any jobs. So you either worked on the farm, you remained at home because there was nothing else to do much. In my father's generation, the young men joined the Conservation Corps. And so they went around in the area planting loblolly pines and updating outdoor toilets. The women did work at the home. Then in my peers, only 4 went to college. 1 male and 3 females. I was one of those. 2 of them completed their training, and 2 got married and didn't complete theirs. And so, during this time too, from at least I'd say 1930 to 1938 or more, there were no women that drove at all. There were some cars, but the roads were so poor that it was not much fun to drive. It was sort of, you went if it was necessary. And so what I'm trying to say is that your passion, it didn't strike like a thunderbolt. Your choices were somewhat limited. For females, if you didn't go on for further training, you could be a sales clerk in a store, or you could be a seamstress or a waitress if there was any restaurants or eating places nearby. For further training, you could be a stenographer or a secretary, or you could be a teacher, or you could be a nurse. Those were the main things. And of course, this was before the time of television, and also before the time of schools that had counselors, or have career days where you could be introduced to or observe or be aware of other kinds of jobs. And so I chose to be a teacher. And so the passion is sort of an evolution. It's not like a thunderbolt struck you, said I want with all my heart to be a teacher. But as you got into the career and you saw how the results of it, then you became very passionate about it. And so that is my passion for education.
Okay. Yeah. And I had a follow-up to that. And you already you alluded to it, right? You came of age in a very different time in American history and culture, in the, following the Great Depression, in the context of World War II, at a time when for economic reasons. A lot of people had limited options, and women specifically were not as valued as they should have been, and certainly had less options than they do now. But still within that context, and you went with the options you had and became an educator and did really well. So what do you think empowered you to strive in that context that you just described?
Well, actually, I would say it was more or less just a way of life to serve others, because you uh, you worked with your neighbors. It was neighbors helping neighbors, particularly in this was before mechanization now. And so there was a lot of hard work to do on the farms, and particularly at harvest time. Uh, I don't know that the man that owned the thrashing machine was not in our community. He was in another community, but he did all of our thrashing in all the farms
Mm,
community. But he would start, and all the farmers would go to that farm to help with the thrashing at that farm. And then they would move to the next farm, and then they would move to the next farm. And they had dinner at the places where they were. And so until they had completed the thrashing, and they did the same thing in hog slaughtering, because you provided your own food in this particular time.
mhm,
And you were very limited. Now, this is in North Carolina, kind of southern North Carolina, and
mhm.
so you didn't have too many days. There's no refrigeration. You had an ice box, but you didn't. They didn't even make an ice run in the wintertime, because you could freeze up a little bit of ice. But you had to wait until we had a cold snap to do your slaughtering. This was just so that you could preserve your meat. And they did the same thing. You would go over and help everybody else with their slaughtering, and then they would come and help you. And it was a very busy time, but you had to get it done in a certain amount of time.
Mm,
And then there was, we had some community joint services too. This schoolhouse that I mentioned before, which is now used as a community center, needed a spring cleaning every year. And so we would assemble to do that. The men would cut the bushes that had grown up and do the mowing around it and so forth. And the women would get things tidied up. It had 4 nice rooms in there to use for various things. And so they needed to be straightened around. Sometimes they were not left in very good condition. So, and then this too, now you're into World War II here.
mhm.
And there were uh, group projects there. I know one year we saved up the seeds from our gardens that we had, and we made up packages to send to England. I'm assuming they got there, but anyway, that's what we did. And we had Saturdays, we had scrap iron drives where we went in groups around and looked in ditches and in gullies and what have you, to see about any discarded metal that would be useful in the war. And that was we also made packages for the boys from our community that were in the military for Christmas time and Thanksgiving and 4th of July.
Mhm.
And they also, at this time, the food was rationed, not severely, not like it was in Europe, but it was still rationed because we were sending Lend-Lease and foods to Europe. They built canning centers where people could bring their excess and have one big day of canning all kinds of stuff, soup and green beans and whatever other vegetable you had available. And that too was where you got together and assisted. And so it was just sort of a way of life. Everybody
Mhm.
worked together, and you
Mhm.
saw the results of that too.
Mhm.
So
So the hardships that existed in that context sort of lent itself to selfless acts and service just as a way of being.
yes,
Um, how did you go from your, small town context with, like you said, most women limited jobs or married, things like that. How did you go from that to your very robust career on the international stage?
Well, I another very big factor in my career development, I guess you'd say, was the 4-H Club. Um, this was through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They sponsored the 4-H Club for boys and girls.
Hmm.
And you worked on different projects. All of them were related to farm activities such as gardening and home improvement and clothing construction and food preservation and dairy foods and so forth. And they had, of course, they had the local club contestants, and they had county contestants, and they had state contestants. And so you were able to go, and get an idea of how it was in other parts of the state. And fortunately, North Carolina is a very varied state. We have lots of mountains in the west, and we have the seashore in the south, in the east, and with a great deal of variety in between. So it was very, very interesting to see the different parts of the state. And then what was really nice was when you got to the national level, if you got that far, because then you got to Chicago or to Washington, D.C. For 4-H activities. And then fortunately, I was selected to go to be an exchange student, foreign exchange student. And I went to the United Kingdom, England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. And so that is the first step to international sorts of activities.
Hmm. Great. And then that just carried over through your academic career, having opportunities to do Fulbright and some of those other consulting
Yes,
jobs. Okay,
yes.
great. So we've talked a lot about sort of how you went from where you were to sort of the version of yourself that you ended with, and how you became empowered to go from being in the small town to doing education at the international stage. I also want to talk about how you have empowered others throughout your career. So as you reflect on your career, how do you think you empowered others, and what are some success stories that you can share in terms of your impact on some of the people that you educated and worked with?
Okay. Well, I taught at the secondary level for about 8 years before I went into college and university teaching. And
Hmm.
I had a high school age students that I worked with. And it really didn't matter too much whether they were high school students or college students. You can always provide encouragement when they were succeeding at some activity that they were doing or something that they were producing. Encouragement, I think, is a great thing. And you can also help them identify some opportunities which they might not be aware of. And this will get them to thinking more about what is possible to do.
Hmm.
And another thing which was very valuable to me was to have support from people
Hmm.
and other groups. Sometimes they would be allied to the 4-H club and would offer an opportunity to do something. So try to help them uh, identify support, and this would be especially true if you're in the college and university setting, because there are some sources there which uh, students may not be aware of,
Hmm.
and making connections. Um, from your experience, you would have this, but they might not, and so you could suggest ways that they could make connections related to what they were trying to do. And I think one of the best things is to uh, have good communication without judging what you're hearing, but
Hmm.
listen and letting them, if they have particularly if they're having a problem.
Hmm.
And so I think they being you said some success stories. I have a couple, but I hope there are more than that. But anyway, what I'm going to say is I was at Purdue for almost 20 years. And so this gave me a period where I could easily or more easily keep up with students and what they were doing and how successful they were. And so I was able to, um, I worked with doing supervising student teachers at Purdue. And so I would know when those that remained in Indiana or to other universities that remained in the state, you could keep up with rather rapidly. A lot of them went to other states, and so it was more difficult to keep up with them. But anyway, particularly in Indiana, some of our students would become supervising teachers in the teaching centers, and so I consider that success. And there were a number that were very successful teachers. We didn't need a teaching center in every school there was in Indiana. So if they were in a school that was not located near a university or something, they oftentimes uh, would not be available for supervising student teachers. But I was going to mention two other successes. I consider them successes. Um, the American Home Economics Association was host to the International Home Economics meeting in Minneapolis, one of the years that I was at Purdue. And each university was invited to prepare a pre or post experience for foreign professionals that were coming to this meeting. And I was able to get a pre experience approved at Purdue where I had 8 students. I had, let's see, 2 from Japan and 2 from Korea, and I think 2 from Malaysia and 2 from Slovenia in this group. It was going to be a road trip.
Hmm.
I met them. They came into Philadelphia, and these experiences were supposed to give them as much overview as you could get of culture and life in the United States and related to their profession, whatever their specialty was, if you could provide something for that, as well as sightseeing some of the historical places. And so, so to get some of the culture, we made arrangements for these visiting professionals. A lot of them were teachers in teacher training colleges, or in large high schools in their country. They stayed in the homes of the teachers. There were teachers in Philadelphia that met them, and they had a welcome banquet for us when we got there. Everybody brought something in for it, and it was a very nice start. We did a little sightseeing in Philadelphia, which was a very good place to start.
Hmm.
Then we went down to Washington, D.C., and we had a little sightseeing there. That was the only place that we didn't live with people. We stayed at the Catholic University dorms because that was something that you could arrange to do. And so we did that. Because there were no teachers that we knew there in DC. But I did some sightseeing, and we also had an overview of the services that were provided by the American Home Economics Association, which had their headquarters there in DC. So that was what we did. Then we went on to Ohio State University, and there we had an overview of the the USDA, Department of Agriculture Extension Service, how they worked with, it's not quite as formal an educational experience as teaching in a school, but it is in sort of like continuing education in areas, rural areas. And then we wound up at Purdue, where the emphasis there was on the different specialties that were offered in the School of Economics. And we had one of our participants was a child development person from Japan. And so we included a trip to the Children's Museum in Indianapolis, which is considered recognized in the world as a very fine children's organization, museum. She returned to Japan with many pictures and a good report, and impressed the people in the Tokyo education area there. They sent her back to Indiana, and she contacted me, and I made arrangements for her to work with the people there in Indianapolis at the Children's Museum. She returned, and they organized a children's museum along the same interactive kinds of lines that they had in Indiana. I had the other student was from Slovenia. She wasn't a student. I say student because she was registered as a student to participate in this. She was very interested in the hotel and tourism, hotel and hospitality specialty that was offered at Purdue. So she went back to Slovenia, and the next year at Christmas time, we kept in touch, but not very close in touch. She called me from Chicago. She had arrived in Chicago. She was coming to Purdue to do a master's degree in hospitality. And so I helped her get housing when she got to West Lafayette, and made some arrangements to see if I could get her some financial assistance and that kind of thing. She returned and was doing well in setting up some hospitality and tourism kinds of things in Slovenia. And so those are two, I call them success stories anyway.
Thank you. Yeah, as sort of mentioned in your bio, and as the viewers probably have a sense of, right, you've done a lot of work in a lot of contexts, a lot of different people. So it's fair to say you've been around the block and around the world. What advice would you give women today about perseverance in terms of the sort of the work context?
I think it's very important to have a pretty well-defined long-term plan for your career. And that's not to say that it's going to progress along in a very smooth, step-by-step sort of thing. So I think you need to be aware of this and see if you be willing to know that there are going to be some changes. It may be that the forward projection for your career may stay sort of quiet for a while. You'll be in the same position, or it's not much happening for a variety of reasons. There might be personal and family problems that would interfere with what you were doing, or your health problems, or local and or national economic conditions, wars and disasters, natural disasters. All of those are objects that you need to persevere through.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you can't always plan for what's going to happen, but you can imagine what might happen, and so you can sort of calculate perhaps some strategies for overcoming these in case they do occur. There's always, if you can possibly have an emergency financial fund, that is always something that will help you over perverse times. And another thing that I think is that it's very important to get along in your career path is to keep up to date in what's happening in your career. And this is especially important if you have to take a time out. And I'm saying this because many women have a family and they have to take a year off or when they're very small or for various reasons. And so it's always, you need to keep up with what is happening professionally. And if you have a family, it may be that your husband is transferred completely away somewhere and you have to change. And then you have to sort of reestablish yourself there in wherever it is that you are going, because you don't know the opportunities there, and you need to keep that in mind. And you may even have to take a temporary kind of work. But if you do, see if you can get something that is related to what you are in. And that will help you to be ready to pick up where you left off, or to continue in a more strenuous approach to your career. I know I'm speaking from experience,
Mm-hmm.
because of excuse me, of my own perseverance that I had. My first job after college was with Extension Service, and I was there for a year. And then I was married, and I moved away from North Carolina into another state. And so there were no extension jobs where I moved to available at that time. And so that's when I taught at the secondary level. And by chance, in that time of teaching at the secondary level, we went, and I was in Missouri, was the state that I went to.
Mm-hmm.
We went to the University of Missouri for the Future Homemakers of America state meeting. And while we were there, they had various people from the university, home economics professors, speak to the high school students about opportunities for coming to the university for further study and preparing
Mm-hmm.
for different kinds of careers. And they also mentioned something about completing your master's degree. And they reviewed some of the available assistantships that were currently available that would help you financially. And this was very interesting to me. And so I applied for one of those and received it. It required 15 hours of work every week in research related to home economics, but at least it gave me an opportunity to complete my master's degree there. And at that time, we had two daughters. One daughter stayed with their father because she was in elementary school, and the youngest one went with me and went to daycare there at the university. And then I went into teaching at a teacher training college there in Northwest Missouri. And I heard of the General Foods Fund Fellowship, which was available at Iowa State. And I applied for that and got it. And it had a very nice stipend with it. I didn't have to do work. I had to be successful in my studies,
Mhm.
but I didn't have to do work. And so I was able to get in the residency requirement with both girls with me because we were in marriage student housing. And then I didn't get my PhD completed before my husband had a position offered in Japan. The whole family to go to Japan, and I thought this is just a too much wonderful experience not to accept, and so we moved to Japan. I had collected all my data from my dissertation, but I hadn't written it yet. I was working on it, but that was something that I could do while we were in Japan. And so I did that. And then I had to return to summer school to take comprehensive exams and to finish writing the dissertation. But that was over a period of about 6 years.
Mhm.
So you have to get through moving, living in a foreign country, finishing up your work, and then returning. And when I returned to Purdue, and there I remained until I retired.
Mhm. Right, right, right. Yeah, I guess I didn't know that you were still working on your PhD in Japan. I didn't know that.
Yes, well, I had completed all my coursework,
Mhm.
but I didn't, and I had collected the data, but I
Mhm.
didn't have my dissertation.
Dissertation. Got it. Okay.
And so, and then of course, you need to meet with your committee, your graduate committee, periodically.
Right. And this
Uh,
was before they had Zoom.
right. Yeah. So it is necessary to have this long range objective and do your best to overcome obstacles that are bound to occur.
Mhm. Thank you. I mean, that marries really well with like the work that I do in coaching with my clients, right? It's, we set short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals for either themselves or their business team. But then we also really think about what happens if something gets thrown in. There's a wrench that gets thrown in there. How do we overcome those goals? And like, how do we tie those goals to specific passions and specific purpose so that if one goal falls apart, there's still a bigger picture focus. So thank you. And for you, that bigger picture focus was education and service in some ways, right? So,
Yes, because this is where I did the volunteer teaching of the English at
mhm,
the Tokyo University School for the Blind. I did not work professionally
mhm,
when I was in Japan. I was busy enough managing the girls that were in school there and doing the shopping and so forth and so on. But it was a very enriching experience.
mhm,
One all of us would not exchange for anything because it was a very, very good experience because we got to go to other countries as well because
mhm,
we came on home leave and that meant we could travel through other countries on our way home. And so it just opened up a world of that you wouldn't get otherwise. And so, even though it did delay completing my degree, it was well worth it. We all agreed to that. So,
right.
but it was very interesting too to work at the University School for the Blind because there was an association there of university women, American university women. I think maybe some of them were from Canada too. But since it was and since Tokyo is a huge city, there were lots of foreign people there connected with other embassies and what have you. And so they had this association. And what they did was go into schools and assisted with the spoken English. They taught English in schools all the way from kindergarten all the way up to the university. And the University of their School for the Blind had always asked for a teacher to come, but most of the ones that were there were high school or secondary teachers,
Mhm.
and so they were hesitant to go. They just they felt like there were enough schools that they could go into. But anyway, when I arrived, they said, well, so many of the teachers have already been placed, but we do have this one place that's available, the School for the Blind. And I said, oh dear, well, I have not had any experience with working with blind students. And they said, well, why don't you go and give it a try? And so I agreed to go. And this was more practicing English conversation with a native speaker
Mhm.
than teaching them grammar, because their grammar, they knew the rules of grammar better than I did English. But anyway, we had a very good experience. They enjoyed it when I came, and we tried to tell some jokes in English and just everyday discussion and so forth. I was interested. I even invited them to come to our home. One class, I had two classes there. The advanced class, I invited to come to our home for a dinner. And they said, oh, they were very pleased. They wanted to come and see how Americans lived. I thought it was very interesting that they used that term, that they were going to come and see, because they couldn't see, really.
Mhm.
They were quite blind. And I wondered whether they would be able to get there or not, because you had to come on the subway and you had to get on buses and then you had to walk a little ways. But they came and they seemed to have a very good time. So that was a very enriching experience.
Great. Yeah, that's another success story, right?
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, yeah. So I'm coming to you in, the election wrapped up. They're counting the votes, but I think it's fair to say that we're going to have the first female vice president, and in your lifetime and in America's lifetime, right? What is
Right.
what does that moment mean for you personally?
Well, personally, I guess, my career is at an end. And so I don't think it's going to affect any career aspects for me, but certainly for others it will. And I'm always pleased when I learn that a woman has been appointed to or hasn't achieved a position of power and importance, or when they are recognized or get an award for some accomplishment that they have made, because I think this encourages and enhances the opportunity for those beginning a career or those who are midway in a career. And it's just, I think the equity of advancing in a career is enhanced when we have women that are recognized, and this is true too when they achieve being a representative, either at the state level in the state government, or representative or senator in a national government. And so I can see that as one of the pluses of having and I think the vice president-elect is very energetic and will serve as an excellent role model for anyone aspiring to a higher position or further of their career.
Mhm. Yeah, and you talked, you used the word role model, and I know I appreciate when you talked about working in the education setting. A lot of your influence was not just the curriculum and the class content, but sort of the other considerations and acting as a role model for your students so that they knew they too could persevere or get out of whatever their specific contexts were. So, I'm sure VP Harris will have her own legacy, both politically, but also just her own mark on American society and in women, and women of color and a younger generation of women. What
Well,
legacy do you hope that? Go ahead.
I didn't mention that aspect of it, but that is important also, that she does happen to be a woman of color, both from two different sources. And I think that too is an added aspect of this particular vice president.
Yeah, I mean, it shows a lot of things have changed since the 1920s, right? Yeah, so I was gonna sort of leave with what legacy do you hope, or what mark do you hope that you have left on others and on the world?
Oh dear. Well, I think it's difficult to assume that you're making much of a legacy, but I hope that as many pupils and students as I have had over, let's see, about 40 years in education, and there's also, I didn't mention it, but when you're talking about service to others, I was a local 4-H club leader for a number of years in addition to teaching, and so I taught. I have had a contact with people both in a formal educational setting and in an informal one. And so I hope that these pupils and students that I've had, I hope that I know a number of them have been successful in teaching, because I know where they've taught and I know the programs that they've had, and they have had me come and from time to time and meet with their groups and encourage the students to further study. So I know that that they have, and a lot of them too have remained in the same position. I mean, in the same area for a long time, geographical area,
Mhm.
and so they can build there in with their people that they work with. So I'm hoping that they have established homes that have been healthy and happy, and encouraging if they have children or if they have neighbors or whatever, to make the most of every opportunity that they can see that will give them some skill or some knowledge or some energy or some interest. And so I guess I don't have anybody that I know of that is going to be a Nobel winner, but receive a Nobel award. But I don't think to have a legacy, I don't think you have to achieve that level. So I'm willing to be pleased with a lower level of success.
All right. Well, I definitely know that your legacy as a grandmother is certainly appreciated. I know that I would not have gone to Ukraine and done Peace Corps or taught in China or done any of my international service oriented work had it not been from all those Christmases hearing your inspirational stories, and you really instilled in me a legacy of service that I'm certainly thankful for.
Well, then you have covered for me what my legacy is. You've just stated it.
Well, now that the Nobel Prize is in the mix, no pressure, right?
Who knows? It's
I'll,
not completed
I'll,
yet.
yeah, it's not completed yet. I'll keep on working. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Well, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Great.